The first thunder hit without warning. The entire station trembled. Lights flickered across long metal corridors. Storage shelves rattled. A deep sound rolled through the structure like a giant growl trapped inside the walls. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the alarm started. Workers looked up from their stations. Scientists stopped their discussions. Cargo crews froze in place as the strange vibration continued for several seconds before finally fading away. Silence followed. An uneasy silence. "What was that?" one technician whispered. Nobody had an answer. The station, known as Horizon Point, had orbited the colony world below for almost 200 years. It was one of the safest places in the sector. Built by several species working together, it had survived storms, equipment failures, and decades of heavy traffic. But nobody had ever heard anything like this. Inside the operations center, worried voices quickly filled the room. "We're checking all structural systems. No hull damage detected. Power grids are stable. Could it be an external impact? Nothing on sensors." The answers only created more questions. Among the busy staff stood a human engineer named Lena. Unlike the others, she wasn't staring at the displays with panic. She was listening. The sound had lasted only a few seconds, but something about it felt familiar. Not dangerous. Familiar. Then another worker rushed into the room. Reports are coming in from every level. People felt it everywhere. Lena folded her arms. "Interesting." The worker looked at her. "Interesting?" The station just shook. Lena gave a small smile. "Exactly." The worker stared at her as if she had lost her mind. Hours passed. Investigations began immediately. Maintenance crews searched power conduits. Security teams inspected restricted areas. Automated systems ran thousands of diagnostics. Everything came back normal. Yet the station remained tense. Rumors spread quickly. One story claimed an ancient creature had attached itself to the station. Another claimed pirates were using some kind of hidden weapon. Others whispered about old legends connected to the station's earliest builders. Fear always moved faster than facts. By evening, many residents were avoiding public areas. Families stayed inside their quarters. Several businesses closed early. The uncertainty was becoming worse than the event itself. Then the thunder returned. Boom! The sound rolled through the station with even greater force. Tables shook. Windows vibrated. Several frightened residents screamed. Emergency lights flashed across multiple decks. In a crowded cafeteria, conversations stopped instantly. A tall alien administrator gripped the edge of a table. "That's no equipment malfunction." Others nodded nervously. The administrator looked toward Lena, who happened to be nearby. "You heard that?" "I did. And you're smiling again." Lena took a sip from her drink. "A little." The administrator looked confused. "Why?" She thought for a moment. "Because it doesn't sound angry." The entire table stared at her. One resident blinked. "Not angry." "Listen carefully next time," Lena said. "There's a pattern." The administrator shook his head. "The walls are shaking." "Yes." "And you think that's good news?" "No," Lena replied calmly. "I think it's a clue." That answer only confused everyone more. Later that night, Lena sat alone in a maintenance control room reviewing old station records. Most people were trying to find what caused the sound. She was trying to understand why it happened. There was a difference. She compared vibration logs from both incidents. Then she compared them again. Her smile slowly disappeared. Not because she was scared, because she was curious. The intervals looked deliberate, almost intentional, as if something was trying to repeat the same message. A notification suddenly appeared on her screen. "New incident detected." Before she could react, the third thunder arrived. The strongest one yet. The entire station shook so violently that tools fell from storage racks. Across Horizon Point, frightened residents grabbed walls and railings. Power flickered for several seconds. Several transport systems automatically shut down. This time, nobody laughed off the danger. Even experienced officers looked worried. Emergency meetings were called immediately. Within minutes, security sensors finally found something. A source, deep inside the station, far below the active sections, in a region nobody had entered for decades. An area sealed shortly after the station's construction. The room fell silent as the location appeared on the main display. The abandoned sector. Nobody knew what remained down there. Most records had been lost generations ago. The administrator slowly looked around the room. "Who authorized a scan of that section?" "No one," a technician replied quietly. Then why is it active? Nobody answered. Every sensor on the screen showed the same result. The thunder was coming from somewhere inside the forgotten sector. Lena stared at the display. For the first time all day, her smile returned. Not because she knew the answer, because she finally knew where to start looking. Then a new alert flashed across every screen. Motion detected. The signal was coming from deep inside the sealed section, and whatever was moving down there was getting closer. Nobody slept well after the motion alert. Across Horizon Point, worried conversations filled private quarters and emergency shelters. Some residents packed bags in case an evacuation order was announced. Others sat in silence, waiting for answers that nobody seemed able to provide. The abandoned sector had become the center of every discussion, a place forgotten for decades, a place that was suddenly active again. Early the next morning, a small investigation team gathered outside one of the old access tunnels leading into the sealed section. Security officers stood ready. Engineers checked equipment. Station administrators reviewed emergency procedures for the 10th time. Lena arrived carrying a small scanner and a tablet. The administrator from the previous day looked at her. "You still think this is some kind of clue? I think we're finally asking the right question." "And what's that?" She glanced toward the massive sealed door. "Not what is making the sound." The administrator frowned. "Then what?" Lena smiled slightly. "Why it wants to be heard." The administrator sighed. "That's a very human answer." A few minutes later, the ancient door slowly opened. Dust floated into the air. Darkness waited beyond. The tunnel looked untouched by time. Nobody spoke as the team stepped inside. The deeper they traveled, the stranger things became. Old signs marked sections that no longer appeared on station maps. Maintenance terminals sat abandoned along the walls. Some carried symbols from civilizations that had helped build Horizon Point generations earlier. One technician ran a hand across a faded panel. "This place is like a museum." "No," Lena said quietly. "A museum is something people remember." The technician looked around. "What would you call this?" She stared into the darkness ahead. "A forgotten promise." The words stayed with the group as they continued forward. Nearly an hour passed before they heard it again. Thump! The sound echoed through the tunnel. Everyone froze. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Several officers immediately reached for equipment. The vibration rolled through the floor beneath their feet. One nervous technician whispered, "It's closer. Much closer." Yet Lena's attention remained fixed on her scanner. The administrator noticed. "What are you seeing?" She looked at the readings. The intervals are almost identical. So random failures don't usually behave like this." The administrator stared at her. "You keep saying that." "Because it's important." Before anyone could continue the discussion, another sound appeared. Not thunder. A rhythmic pulse. Deep. Steady. Almost like a heartbeat. The team exchanged nervous looks. Nobody liked that comparison, but nobody could deny it. The pulse continued as they moved deeper into the forgotten sector. Eventually, the tunnel opened into a massive chamber. Everyone stopped. The room was enormous, far larger than anyone expected. Ancient machinery filled the space from floor to ceiling. Thick support structures stretched across the chamber like giant ribs. Most of it looked inactive, except for one section. A distant glow illuminated the center of the room. The heartbeat-like pulse was coming from there. The team approached carefully. As they drew closer, the shape finally became clear. A machine. A gigantic machine. It occupied most of the chamber. Its surface showed signs of age, but it was still operating. Barely. One technician stared in disbelief. "How has nobody known this was here?" Another looked equally shocked. "How has it survived this long?" Lena slowly walked around the machine. Her eyes moved across damaged panels and worn components. The more she examined it, the more concerned she became. The administrator noticed. "What is it?" She pointed towards several sections. "Look." The others followed her gaze. Hairline cracks. Temporary repairs. Ancient patches. The machine had been struggling for years. Maybe decades. Yet it had continued running. Keeping something alive. Keeping something working. Thump! The thunder returned. This time the entire chamber shook. Several people jumped. But Lena didn't. Instead, she stared at the machine. Then she whispered something almost to herself. "You've been trying to tell us." "What?" the administrator asked. She looked up. "I don't think this sound is a threat." The administrator folded his arms. "Then what is it?" Lena took a slow breath. "I think it's a warning." Before anyone could respond, every light in the chamber suddenly flashed red. Emergency alarms erupted throughout the station. The peaceful pulse vanished. The machine emitted a loud, grinding noise. Warning symbols appeared across nearby displays. Critical system failure detected. Across Horizon Point, lights flickered again. Transportation systems shut down. Power levels dropped. Panic spread instantly. Inside the chamber, the team watched in horror as cracks of bright energy raced across sections of the ancient machine. One technician stepped back. "It's failing." Another looked toward the exits. "We need to leave now." But Lena wasn't looking at the damage. She was staring at a display that had just come to life for the first time in centuries. Ancient symbols scrolled across the screen. Then they translated automatically. A single message appeared. The room fell silent. Because the machine wasn't announcing an attack. It wasn't threatening anyone. It was asking for help. And seconds later, the entire station shook harder than ever before. The emergency alarms did not stop. Their sharp warning tones echoed through every level of Horizon Point as power fluctuations spread across the station. Lights dimmed, recovered, then dimmed again. Transport lifts paused between floors. Communication systems became unstable. Fear that had once been based on rumors was now becoming real. Inside the ancient chamber, the investigation team stood frozen around the giant machine. The translated message still glowed on the display. "Help required." The words felt strangely human. Not a command, not a threat, a request. The administrator stared at the screen. "I don't understand." Neither did most of the team. But Lena stepped closer. "We need to find out what it's trying to tell us." A technician pointed toward the growing cracks along the machine's outer surface. "We don't have time for that. Look at it. It's falling apart." The machine suddenly released another deep thunder. Thump! The chamber shook violently. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Several warning indicators turned red. The administrator made a decision. Everyone back to Operations Center. Now, no one argued. The situation had become too dangerous. As the team hurried out of the chamber, Lena looked back one last time. The machine seemed almost alive. Not because it moved, not because it thought, but because it was struggling. And struggling things deserved to be understood before they were abandoned. Hours later, Horizon Point's main conference room was packed. Engineers, safety officers, station leaders, and technical specialists from several species filled the room. The atmosphere was tense. A large display showed the machine's worsening condition. Power output was dropping. Critical support systems depended on that power. If the machine completely failed, the station would face serious problems. The discussion quickly turned into an argument. We should evacuate non-essential residents. We should disconnect the machine. We don't even know what it does. We can't risk the entire station. Voices overlapped. Everyone wanted a solution. Nobody agreed on one. Lena listened quietly. Then she finally spoke. "What if the machine isn't the problem?" The room became silent. Several heads turned toward her. One official frowned. "What does that mean?" She activated her tablet and projected a series of graphs. "The vibrations." A few people groaned. Not because they disagreed. Because they were tired of hearing about them. Lena ignored the reaction. "Look carefully." The patterns appeared on the screen. Perfectly spaced intervals. Repeating sequences. Structured timing. The administrator leaned forward. "You think those are intentional?" "I know they are." A murmur spread through the room. Lena continued. "Machines fail randomly. These vibrations aren't random." She pointed toward one section of the data. "They've been repeating the same sequences over and over." Another engineer crossed his arms. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying the thunder isn't damage." The room remained silent. Lena took a breath. "It's communication." Several people immediately objected. "Communication from what? A machine can't send messages." "That theory makes no sense." Lena expected resistance. She stayed calm. Then explained why it asked for help. Nobody answered. Because nobody could. The translated message was real. Everyone had seen it. The administrator slowly stood. "What are you proposing?" Lena looked around the room. "Before we shut anything down, we study the patterns. And if you're wrong," she met his eyes, "then we lose a few hours." The administrator looked toward the display showing dropping power levels. "And if you're right," Lena answered quietly, "then the station has been trying to tell us something for years." The room became silent again. This time nobody argued. Several hours later, A small team joined Lena in a temporary research area near the abandoned sector. Together, they began studying old station records. Most files were damaged or incomplete. Many were centuries old. But piece by piece, a picture started forming. The machine wasn't an isolated system. It was one of the station's original core systems. It had been operating continuously since Horizon Point was built. Generations had relied on it. Generations had forgotten it existed. As the team searched deeper into the archives, Lena noticed something strange. The vibration patterns matched symbols found in ancient maintenance documents. At first, she thought it was coincidence. Then she found another match. And another. Her heart started racing. She enlarged the data, compared the records, checked them again. The similarities were impossible to ignore. A technician noticed her expression. "What is it?" Lena stared at the screen. "I think I found something." The team gathered around. She pointed toward the repeating thunder patterns. "They aren't random sounds." The technician blinked. "What are they?" Lena slowly looked up. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "A language." Nobody spoke. The room felt suddenly smaller. The thunder that had terrified the station wasn't simply noise. It was information. A message hidden inside vibrations. A message waiting centuries to be understood. Then a new sequence appeared on the monitor. One that had never appeared before. The machine was changing its pattern. And somehow, it seemed to know someone was finally listening. For the first time since the crisis began, fear started giving way to curiosity. The discovery that the thunder contained a hidden language changed everything. Across Horizon Point, residents still worried about the failing systems. But now there was also hope. If the machine was communicating, then perhaps it could also be understood. And if it could be understood, it might be saved. Inside the temporary research center, Lena and her team worked without rest. Ancient station records covered every screen. Old maintenance logs, construction documents, historical archives that nobody had opened in generations. The machine continued sending vibration patterns through the station, but now the sounds felt different. Not because they had changed, because people were finally listening. A technician looked up from his terminal. "I found another match." Lena hurried over. The symbols he displayed matched part of the vibration sequence. Nearby engineers gathered around. "What does it mean?" one asked. The technician zoomed in. Not completely sure. Lena studied the data. Then her eyes widened. "It's not a warning." "What?" She pointed at the translation. "It's an instruction." The room became silent. The machine wasn't simply announcing its condition. It was explaining it. Hours passed as more pieces fell into place. The original builders had created an extraordinary system. Long before Horizon Point was completed, they understood that future generations might lose important knowledge. So they had prepared for it. Instead of relying only on written records, they built maintenance instructions directly into the machine's vibration patterns. If something ever went wrong, the machine itself would teach future engineers how to repair it. The idea amazed everyone. One engineer shook his head in disbelief. "They planned for people forgetting." Lena smiled. "They planned for people being human." The comment earned a few tired laughs. It was true. People forgot things. Civilizations changed. Records disappeared. But the builders had thought ahead. And now their message was finally reaching someone. Unfortunately, there was still a problem. The machine was getting worse. Every hour, more systems across Horizon Point became unstable. Several residential sectors lost power temporarily. Emergency generators were being used more frequently. The station still had time, but not much. Later that evening, the administrator entered the research center. He looked exhausted. "Status report." One technician answered immediately. "We know what's wrong." Another added, "Mostly." The administrator looked at Lena, and she pulled up a large diagram. "The machine has a damaged core section. Can it be repaired?" "Yes." The answer surprised everyone. The administrator blinked. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be." Relief spread across the room. For the first time in days, people allowed themselves to breathe. Then Lena continued. "The problem is where the damage is." The relief disappeared. She enlarged part of the diagram. The damaged section was buried deep inside the machine, far beyond the areas accessible through normal maintenance routes. The room became quiet again. The administrator folded his arms. "Let me guess." Lena nodded. "Someone has to go inside." Nobody liked that answer. Not because the task was impossible, because it would be difficult. The machine was unstable. The environment inside would constantly shift as systems powered on and off. One mistake could shut down the repair attempt entirely. Several people immediately began discussing alternatives. Remote systems, automated tools, external repairs. Lena listened carefully. Then she shook her head. The builders already considered those options. The room fell silent. She pointed toward another translated instruction. It specifically says manual repair. One engineer sighed. Of course it does. The administrator looked around the room. Who can perform it? Nobody answered immediately. Not because nobody was qualified. Because everyone understood the responsibility. Thousands of residents depended on the outcome. Lena looked toward the display showing the repair instructions. Then she stood. I'll do it. Several heads turned instantly. The administrator frowned. You don't have to volunteer. I know. We can review other options. We already did. The room became quiet. Lena wasn't trying to be heroic. That was what everyone respected most. She was simply making a practical decision. The machine had trusted someone to understand its message. Now someone needed to finish the job, and she was the person who understood it best. A technician spoke softly. Are you scared? Lena smiled. Of course. The honest answer surprised everyone. Then she added something else. Being scared doesn't mean you stop. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then one by one, team members nodded. Not because fear had vanished, because courage had appeared beside it. Several hours later, preparations were complete. The repair equipment was ready. The machine's instructions had been translated. The route to the damaged section had been mapped. All that remained was the final step. The giant chamber stood silent as Lena approached the access entrance. Dozens of team members watched. The administrator stepped forward. Good luck. She smiled. See you soon. Then she entered the machine. The access hatch closed behind her. Everyone immediately turned toward the monitoring screens. For several seconds, everything appeared normal. Then something unexpected happened. The thunder stopped. Completely. No vibrations. No pulse. No sound. The giant machine that had shaken the station for days suddenly fell silent. A technician looked at his display. Another checked the sensors. Nobody understood. The administrator slowly stared at the motionless machine. Then a new warning appeared across every screen. Core system entering final phase. And deep inside the machine, Lena realized she had just discovered something the ancient builders never mentioned in their instructions. Inside the ancient machine, Lena stopped and stared at the display in front of her. The translated instructions had ended, but a new message had appeared, one that nobody outside could see. For several seconds, she simply read the words. Then she smiled. Not because the situation was easy, because she finally understood everything. The machine had not entered a failure phase. It had entered a transfer phase. For centuries, it had been carrying responsibilities that no one remembered. It had monitored systems, balanced power, and protected the station quietly in the background. Now it was trying to hand those responsibilities back to the people living on Horizon Point. The machine was not dying. It was asking to be trusted. Outside, the silence continued. The absence of thunder felt wrong. Residents gathered in public areas, watching emergency updates. The administrator remained inside the chamber, eyes fixed on the monitoring screens. Any communication? He asked. A technician shook his head. Nothing yet. The administrator tried not to show his concern, but everyone felt it. The station had become dependent on one person, and nobody liked how much rested on her shoulders. Deep inside the machine, Lena followed the final instructions. The damaged section was smaller than she expected. After days of fear and confusion, the solution itself seemed surprisingly simple. A worn connection had finally reached the end of its life. The builders had anticipated the problem centuries ago. That was why they created the vibration language. That was why they embedded instructions inside the machine. Not because the repair was difficult, because they knew knowledge could disappear. The challenge had never been fixing the machine. The challenge had been understanding it. Lena carefully replaced the damaged component and activated the restoration sequence. Nothing happened. She waited. Still nothing. A small voice inside her mind whispered that perhaps she had misunderstood. Perhaps everyone had. Perhaps they were out of time. Then a new message appeared. Transfer accepted. The machine began to hum softly. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a steady, healthy sound. For the first time since entering, Lena relaxed. A few moments later, lights around her brightened. Power readings stabilized. Warning symbols disappeared one by one. The machine was recovering. Outside, technicians suddenly noticed changes on their displays. Power output was increasing. Life support systems returned to normal levels. Backup generators automatically shut down. One engineer looked up in shock. "It's working." Another checked the readings twice. Then 3 times. "It's actually working." Hope exploded through the chamber. The administrator stepped toward the screens. "Can someone confirm?" A technician smiled for the first time in days. "Confirmed." The room erupted with cheers. But before anyone could celebrate fully, the machine awakened. A deep sound rolled through Horizon Point. Thump. The entire station vibrated. People froze. For a brief second, old fears returned. Then they realized something. The thunder felt different. Steady, balanced, strong. Not a cry for help. A heartbeat. Across the station, residents slowly began smiling. The sound echoed through every corridor. Not as a warning, as reassurance. Minutes later, Lena emerged from the machine. The waiting team immediately surrounded her. Questions came from every direction. Did you fix it? What happened in there? What caused all of this? The administrator simply raised a hand. Everyone became quiet. He looked directly at Lena. Why were you smiling? The question surprised her. At the beginning, he continued. When everyone else was scared. Lena thought about it for a moment. Then she looked toward the giant machine. When I first heard the thunder, I didn't hear something dangerous. The room listened carefully. I heard something struggling. Nobody interrupted. She continued softly. Most people heard a threat because they were afraid. I heard a problem because I was curious. The administrator nodded slowly. And that made you smile. It gave me hope. The room remained silent. Lena glanced toward the machine one final time. It was trying its best to survive. It kept working for generations without anyone remembering it existed. I think that's worth respecting. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then one technician quietly started clapping. Another joined. Then another. Soon the entire chamber filled with applause. Not for a hero. Not for a rescue. For understanding. Over the following weeks, life returned to normal across Horizon Point. The forgotten sector was restored and preserved. The machine's language became required study for future engineers. The ancient builders were honored for their foresight. And the story spread far beyond the station. People told it again and again. The story of the thunder that shook walls. The machine that asked for help. And the human who listened. Years later, visitors would still ask why the famous engineer smiled when everyone else was afraid. The answer never changed. Because humanity's greatest strength was not power. It was the willingness to stay curious when others panicked. To stay hopeful when others gave up. To keep searching for answers when fear demanded retreat. The thunder that once terrified Horizon Point became a symbol of cooperation, resilience, and trust. And every time its deep vibration rolled gently through the station, residents remembered a simple lesson. Sometimes the loudest cry in the universe is not a warning. Sometimes it is a request to be understood. And sometimes, all it takes is one human willing to listen.